What's happened to the Belarusian opposition? With the conflict in Ukraine pushing Minsk and Moscow ever closer together, has the Union state morphed into one Russia? And is there any hope for political dissidents to rise again? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Belarusian opposition. Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Chikunovskaya almost fell into politics by accident after her husband Sergei, a prominent pro-democracy activist, was arrested just days after announcing he would run for president. The former schoolteacher became the figurehead of the pro-democracy movement. Now, many saw her as Belarus's best hope to oust Alexander Lukashenko, the man many dub Europe's last dictator.
You know, during all this election campaign, I haven't seen myself as politics, as politician, and during all this campaign, I was pushed myself forward and forward, and I don't see myself in politics now. No, I'm not politician, but this is my fate now, and this is my mission. So I don't have right to step away. I have to continue. I have to. To take this mission and not to leave it. I just have no right.
Well, in 2020, Chikunovskaya took on Alexander Lukashenko, but was beaten in a landslide, only taking about 10% of the vote. That result, however, was widely disputed. The opposition cried foul, and massive anti-government protests spread across the country. The vast majority of the international community also rejected the result. Tsikhanouskaya became a household name and even a contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. Since then, the opposition leader has met with foreign governments lobbying for tougher sanctions against the Belarusian regime.
Now, when a regime is not ready to change their behavior, I think that a new wave of sanction measures have to be imposed on the regime because they don't understand other language. And looking back into our history, only sanctions just succeeded to change behavior of Lukashenko. We understand that sanctions are not silver bullet, but they will help to stop repressions, to release political prisoners. We are sure in this, but I have to underline that sanctions should be joint. Sanctions should be imposed by all the democratic countries, the USA, UK, Canada, European Union, and others. Only in this joint position, sanctions will be powerful.
Well, Belarus has been on the receiving end of serious sanctions, especially in the wake of Russia's assault on Ukraine. Minsk has been one of the Kremlin's closest allies throughout the conflict, and it's paid a price. Many now see Lukashenko and Belarus as nothing more than an extension of Vladimir Putin, essentially parroting the Russian president's propaganda.
For the first time in decades, we are on the brink of a conflict that could suck in, like a vortex, the entire continent. We are seeing today all of the irresponsibility and, to pardon the bluntness, dullness of some Western politicians. The behavior of the leaders of neighboring countries that defies logic and reasonable explanation, their downright morbid desire to walk right on the edge.
So is the Belarus-Russia Union state really just one single entity? And does the Belarusian opposition have any influence whatsoever in the future of its country? Well, joining me now to debate that is from Warsaw, Pavel Bersto, a foreign policy advisor for national anti-crisis management in Belarus. From Vilnius, Lithuania, we have exiled Belarusian journalist Hanna Lubakova. She is also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. And from Washington, Elizabeth Brau. She is a senior research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, Pavel, there had once been hope that the opposition, especially with so much support from the EU, could actually change the trajectory of Belarus. But can it be said now that Minsk is nothing more than an extension of the Kremlin with a leader for life?
It's getting there, but it's not there yet. I think it's important to highlight that we are currently under Russian occupation. under military occupation. We didn't resist. Lukashenko didn't resist because he gave away our sovereignty for this occupation in exchange for it. But we are under occupation currently, and Lukashenko has no control over Russian troops. That's a fact. They do what they want. They do what they can. So currently, he's Putin's puppet. More legal terms, we're not part of Russia, but we're getting there, unfortunately.
So you say he's Putin's puppet. I mean, how do you feel then when you see what's happened in Ukraine? Do you ever think, wow, that could have been us? Had the opposition, had you been successful in pushing Lukashenko out of power, it could have been Russia doing in Belarus what it is now doing in Ukraine.
You know, I don't like to think what could have been in terms of such a negative way. Obviously, we've seen from Russia, from Putin, that he's more than capable of doing it. But maybe perhaps historically, you know, Putin has always had something against Ukraine. He's mentioned it several times. Maybe his feelings are slightly different towards Belarus. But to be honest, I don't think so. And to guess, could it have been, might it have been, I think I don't see much point of that, to be honest.
Fair enough. Let me ask Hannah then, if I can put the same to you as well. I mean, some are saying Belarus is lost. That this is it. This union state is now just basically one country. And you can say, as many have, that Lukashenko is a puppet of Putin, but it is what it is. And Belarus is no longer independent.
So we have Lukashenko, who is absolutely Putin's puppet, who is very dependent economically, politically, diplomatically, morally on Russia, on the Kremlin, on Putin personally. But we have also Belarusian people, right? And they are important. They are the subject and should be treated as the subject of politics. As we see what people did, they disagreed with the potential deployment of Belarusian troops to Ukraine, so the troops were not sent to Ukraine. 97% of Belarusians, the absolute majority, are against the war, are against Belarus participation in the war, and that's something that both Lukashenko and Putin have to pay attention to, and they actually paid. So I would say that there is obviously a threat to our sovereignty and independence. Pavel already mentioned this de facto military occupation, but also we lost our sovereignty in national security sphere, in geopolitical sphere, because Lukashenko does not control our foreign policy at the moment. But at the same time, we have the absolute majority of Belarusians who are against Lukashenko, who did not support him. And he also feels that, Putin feels that, and also Lukashenko's circle feels that.
Hannah, I have to ask you, though, you quoted one poll that said 97%, as you put it, of Belarusians are against the war. Let's be clear, though. Are they against the war or against Belarusian troops being used in that war?
They are, this is the Chatham House survey, people are against the deployment of Belarusian troops to Ukraine. That's clear, but also I think there is a consensus in the Belarusian society that, well, neither people nor elites nor army want the war to come to our country, and our country being an active participant in that. And it also means that Lukashenko's most loyalists are against that. So this is a really crucial moment for Belarusians because, well, his decisions, Lukashenko's decisions, are not really supported by his elites, by his army, and the people in the country.
Okay, you say it's a crucial moment. I mean, do you have any hope that this could be some kind of turning point? Could the war in Ukraine work to the benefit of the Belarusian opposition? I mean, what would have to happen now for you to go home?
I think the war created, well, that's a really painful development for Belarusians, and all of us are against that, but that also created a dynamic in the country. Lukashenko crossed the red line. Now we see that he is really fragile, he's really scared, he really arrests his minister of forestry most recently, even his personal doctor. Bankers, top bankers in the country were arrested. So we can see that he is constantly feels under threat. And again, that's something that the democratic forces, the opposition, should do. They should split the elites. They should impose as much pressure as possible from inside the country, from outside the country, meaning sanctions, and obviously try to preserve structures that Lukashenko is trying to destroy. Civil society, media, human rights defenders, different organizations that might be dissolved in Belarus, but people are still there and people are still trying to find a way to unite, to mobilize. They launched this anti-war movement in Belarus. 1,500 people have been detained, but still people are trying to show as much discontent as possible in any way possible. So they are creative, they spread information, and basically, you know about these partisans who stop the movement of Russian troops on the railway. So many things are happening, and this is not the done deal at all. And there is a lot of dynamic inside the country. So both the democratic forces should use it, but also people should remain united and mobilized as much as possible.
Okay. You know, Elizabeth, just a year ago, really, some actually thought that Lukashenko was becoming too much of a liability for Putin, that he was actually problematic for the Kremlin. Looking back now, was that the wrong assessment? Was Putin's, going after this strong of an alliance, almost controlling Minsk, was that smart strategically?
I think it was his only option, because if you don't have many friends, you can't be very choosy, and that applies to both of them. Putin at that point and still doesn't have many friends among international leaders. In fact, he has almost zero, and the same thing goes for Lukashenko. So when he made his crazy moves last year that you mentioned, Andrea, of weaponizing migrants to try to weaken the European Union, Lithuania in particular, and Poland, that seemed like that's just not something that a respected leader does. But Putin was not in a position to cut him off simply because he didn't have many friends. And likewise, today Lukashenko is not in a position to cut Putin off because he has no friends himself. So it's a miserable marriage, but there it is. The two of them are in it.
Fair enough. Let me come back to Warsaw, because I want to talk about the potential example that the Belarusian opposition might be setting for other opposition activists that are still in countries under Russia's, sphere of influence. Do you think it's deterring, or is it inspirational? What's happened to the Belarusian opposition over the past year?
I think you can only say it's inspirational. We rised up as a nation. I think we united as a nation. You meet any Belarusian abroad, it's the first subject that comes up. It's only support, it's only negative, it's only positives. Of course, at times we might disagree on some sort of policy implementations, but the one thing we definitely have as common is we're united to fight. And I think we see this on the international arena. When's the last time a Belarusian leader met so many heads of states in any opposition? It's really setting the image on the global stage. But also it's important to highlight, I think Hannah touched on it, is a lot of work is actually being inside the country that is not sometimes portrayed on the international media. The partisans sabotaging the rail is a great example, but also let's not forget we have cyber partisans that are hacking into state security services, databases, leaking information, showing who's responsible for what. There's a network of local groups, activists in yards, cities that are constantly, having their own little protests. This might not sound much, but it keeps the morale going. And, as long as there's morale, as long as there's energy, we will continue.
I mean, Hannah, let me ask you, though, because as was just mentioned there, that's not really in the international media. I mean, the Belarusian opposition definitely had its day when it was taking every headline globally. That obviously has changed. It's no longer a priority. Does that concern you, or do you feel the movement, regardless of whatever media coverage, is as strong as ever and continues to keep some momentum?
Well, I mean, it's a new circle, right? So it appears, it disappears. So it's kind of logical. Of course, I think for all of us from Belarus, it's one of the goals actually to preserve, to maintain Belarus high on the agenda because, well, politicians make decisions based on the attention, on the focus and what media are talking about, right? So we need that attention. Sometimes it disappears. Now, of course, it's Ukraine and it is understandable. But what I think for us is important is to put Belarus into this context because, well, the regime made our country the aggressor in this war, but people actively resist that. And if we actually analyze how Ukrainians perceived at first in the beginning of the war Belarus, there was a lot of negativity, but actually now it changed because Ukrainians and the world distinguish between the regime and people. And why is it important? Because, well, the regime should be punished, but people should be supported. What Lukashenko is now doing, because he sees that, well, Putin is not that successful in this war, he's trying to appeal to Western governments to open the door again. Lift sanctions, don't isolate me anymore. There were these letters sent by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belarus, Vladimir Mackey, to several governments in Europe, asking for the same. And basically now they're trying to find a way out, and it's really important not to allow Lukashenko to get away with what he has done. I think he only did not send troops because, well, people opposed that. But I think he himself was really ready for that because he wanted to benefit from that war as well.
But Elizabeth, do you think Lukashenko can or has gotten away with what he's done?
Well, for the moment, it seems to be the case. And if I can just add to what Pavel and Hanna were saying about brave Belarusians resisting the regime and trying to do their part for Ukraine, I think the Belarusian railway workers who sabotage Russian or Russian and Belarusian troop movements are absolutely heroic because they're doing so at great cost to their own safety. So. Yes, certainly it looks like Lukashenko has won for now. But one of my areas of work is East Germany, in particular, the 1980s in East Germany, and even up until 1988 and 1989, the government, the regime, the communist regime, seemed to be firmly in place. Yes, there were protests, so prayer services that then ended in protests, but the government seemed to have everything under control. And then in October of 1989, it suddenly spiraled. This protest movement suddenly spiraled. So it can be triggered by any event, really. And so I wouldn't draw too big conclusions from the fact that Lukashenko seems to be firmly in control now. Because if you look at previous authoritarian regimes, one day they look safe, the next day they're gone.
Okay, that is, yeah. I mean, that's one parallel that could potentially be drawn, but some say what happened in the late 80s was an anomaly, kind of, in world history. But I want to go back to, Pavel, what I'd put to you before about how the Belarusian opposition may either serve as kind of a deterrent or an inspiration to other opposition groups in Russia's sphere of influence. Tell us now what's actually happening to your friends and colleagues that are still in Belarus. How are they being treated? Have they been silenced entirely, or are they still working under the radar as much as possible?
I think there obviously has been mass repressions on scale that the country has never seen in its existence. More than 1,100 political prisoners, thousands of cases of torture and repression. Only a few months ago, we submitted, alongside a respected Polish lawyer, 40,000 pages. 40,000 pages, if you can picture how much that is, of evidence of torture, repression, terrorism of the Lukashenko regime. That's before the war. After the war, I'm sure we can easily add another 40,000 pages, and we're working on this now. This was submitted to the International Criminal Court. So there's a lot of work going behind the scenes. In terms of the people themselves, there's repression, but no one's giving up the fight. Of course, there's a lot of people in prison. Even Pavel Latushka, the head of our now Belarus, he's had his cousin arrested, tortured in Belarus. He's had 7 now, maybe 8. We already stopped counting how many criminal investigations against him, even his daughter. His family members have been arrested. So it affects all of us, but it doesn't demotivate us. It only pushes us further. And legally, we have a big solid ground now. We can trial him, and we have lots of projects going on, campaigns such as Punish Putin's Puppet. Exactly as it sounds. Yeah, and just for an example, so we're always relevant in the media. This is British newspapers, Punish Putin's Puppet. It's important to remind people.
I asked Hannah what it would take for her to go home to Belarus. What would it take for you to go home, Pavel?
For me to go home to Belarus, I think there needs to be an opening. And I think there will be an opening. And as you rightly said, these regimes can fall unexpectedly. History says this. Today they're strong, tomorrow they're fleeing in helicopters. Ukraine is a perfect example in 2014. There needs to be an opening. When there's an opening, we will come and we will push that opening to its full potential.
Okay, Hannah, go ahead. I saw you had a comment.
No, sorry, I thought that you were asking me. So just maybe briefly, I think what actually the democratic forces and Belarusians can show to the world, and I think what they've been doing to Ukrainians most recently in the past 2 months, basically Belarusians are sharing their experience of how to preserve structures, of how to establish these sort of corridors of support. We have Belarusian organizations that literally deliver assistance, support, hospitals, like mobile hospitals to Ukraine. We have Belarusian volunteers who fight in Ukraine alongside Ukrainians. So there is a lot of cooperation. There is a lot of sort of this kind of assistance, happening. Also, the democratic forces and generally Belarusians preserved unity. Lukashenko still does not have a majority. Like the majority of Belarusians are against him. So he was not able to change the situation. So we were also able to preserve like every structure of civil society. They fled abroad, but they still exist. They work, operate from abroad, having people inside the country. So I would say that like people now are really politicized, and that's why I'm very optimistic when I'm speaking about this chance for Belarusians, because now that's a really crucial moment, a breakthrough moment, and it all depends, I think, on the democratic forces, on Belarusians, where this country goes. It's either remains under the Iron Curtain, that's what Lukashenko wants, or actually there would be change, and the change is not that far away as my fellow speakers mentioned.
Elizabeth, I'll finish with you, and I mean, this may sound like a far, far reach, but seeing the destruction that has been wreaked on the country, on Belarus's border, on Ukraine, where there is a real brotherhood of sorts between these two countries, could Lukashenko ever, in a sense, turn on Russia in defense of Ukraine after what's been witnessed?
I think, Andrei, even if he were to have a change of heart and say, well, this is absolutely awful what's happening in Ukraine, I think he would not be in a position to do anything about it, because any sort of change that he makes will, I think, inevitably topple him. So this is really the dilemma of dictatorial leaders, that they have to stick firmly to what they are doing, because if they start changing incrementally, they will lose power, and so they stick with their dictatorial rule until the bitter end. And so, well, let's hope that Lukashenko has a change of heart and feels compassion for Ukrainians. But if he were to do so, the logical conclusion would be for him to step down, to resign, and to go to some sort of retirement in a safe place, because with him in charge, Belarus is not in a position to help the Ukrainians.
Because would it take Russia effectively losing the war in Ukraine, or to at least start to appear that it's losing the war, for Lukashenko to make any real decisions about changing his position in Belarus?
I think so, but we have to remember that dictatorial leaders often don't operate on the basis of logic. They operate on a very on a logic known only to them, which is what we have seen with Putin. If he had operated on the basis of logic, he would not have invaded Ukraine. But it's not about logic as the rest of us see it. Frankly, these dictatorial leaders, and as I said, I think there are many lessons to be drawn from the very committed East German leadership who thought they had everything under control, and then turns out society had turned against them, and they had been left behind, and there was no way they could change to please to win the support of their population. And at the end of the day, if it's a massive wave of dissent against the government and a strong government on the other side, that government won't be able to change. It will have to resign, or it will have to be dismissed. And I think, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I think that's what we are looking at.
Okay, Elizabeth Brau, Pavel Bursto, Hanna Rybakova, thank you all so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Great discussion. And our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey, and we'll see you next time.